Thank you for joining us. To those of you coming back to your second or even third or fourth seminar webinar with us at the Independent Schools Parent Forum, thank you very much. And for those of you joining us for the first time, welcome. This is I think the third in a series of discussions that we are having with industry leaders within the independent school sector, discussing the effects of COVID in various ways, but not just that, but also, the how we turn back to normal, and the other issues around independent schooling and independent school selection. I'm very lucky today to be joined by Andrew Mayfield, Director of Admissions at St Paul's School here in London, and James Dahl, Headmaster of Wellington College. So thank you both, and welcome. And I should probably say now you can both, or at least not unmute, but switch your videos on as well. Just a little bit of housekeeping for all our viewers, and that's there will be some Q&A after some short introductory talks, and please do add those in the Q&A box on Zoom, and we will do our best to get through all of them. I'm sure you have lots of burning questions for our two speakers. And we look forward to seeing those and answering them as best we can. We might not get around to them all, so please do look out for our post-Zoom email, and we will send out details from both of our speakers and all of our details as well, so that if you've got anything specific, you can get in touch directly. Quick introduction from me, then. I'm William Petty. I'm one of the directors at Bonas MacFarlane, and we're a full spectrum educational supplementary company working on high-level school placement here in the UK and to a lesser extent overseas, and also higher education placement into universities and American colleges in the US and the UK, as well as having a rather more established and older private tuition business, and of course our sister company with whom we're here today, the Independent Schools Show, where, fingers crossed, we will be returning to Battersea in November for our annual show with approximately 240 schools from around the country in London exhibiting to parents, albeit probably slightly further away than they have been before. So I'm just going to say a few things about what we've seen at Bonas MacFarlane across the market before handing over to the experts. They are obviously both going to talk about what they've done at their institutions, and I will do my best to kind of give a steer if necessary as to whether that reflects the majority, but typically within the independent school system it does, and the leaders of these schools have been meeting within their various associations since COVID started to discuss how together as an industry independent schools are going to take the various measures that are being forced upon them or are now seeming to be extremely necessary as we go into life after lockdown, or the dreaded new normal, which I thought was a phrase, but I now realise I might be the only one using it, certainly at Bonas MacFarlane. But what we've seen is the fact that despite schools have closed, despite the fairly dramatic and once-in-a-lifetime measures taken with the public examinations and the IB and other such qualifications, the one thing that's actually been really constant throughout the pandemic has been admissions. Very simply explainable this, and this is that those teachers and staff running the admissions departments obviously can work remotely, and they're not, although some of them teach, many of them teach, that's not all they're doing, and so those departments have been able to carry on despite the schools being closed. The other reason is, of course, COVID has brought uncertainty to us all, and it's made us really rethink everything that's going on. We've got to remember that private schools and independent schools are no different, and we all don't know what's happening next. The endless talk of the second wave, third wave even, whether these measurements are going to hold, the ones that are being aimed at schools for September, or we're going to have to sort of backtrack. There's a lot of uncertainty, and the one thing the schools can't be uncertain of is having their students and being full up and functional. The margins of running schools in the independent system are very narrow. Many of them, like the two being represented today, are charitable foundations, and they're not there for profit. And despite the fees being admirable from both of them, they really do, believe it or not, barely cover the costs of running one. So children not being present in schools, not being full, simply isn't an option. So there has been this wonderful energy that's continued within admissions departments and still recruiting. And this is a question I'm sure we'll get asked in a different light, but I'll treat it gently, quickly. There are arguably some opportunities for sort of more adventurous parents looking for a move or coming in from outside. With COVID, there's lots of people deciding to move to different places. There's a group of people who are deciding to move to England. So we've seen those departments, admissions departments, really be much more active than they would have been at this time of year and any other normal year, and certainly in the previous 15 or so of my entire career. So it's certainly a moment of great movement and dynamism in terms of school place availability and actually to a certain extent applications. But they are being filled up, those places, even though there's more of them becoming available as far as we can see. So it's certainly not the case that it's going to be a quiet year in schools from September, but it is obviously important and prudent for schools to not sit back and wait and make sure they're not being disadvantaged by COVID. Lots of parents are asking in what situations their children will be disadvantaged by COVID. Well, the cheering answer about that is schools don't want you to be disadvantaged any more than you want your children to be disadvantaged with those admissions. It's a two-way symbiotic relationship, and the admissions side of that is to a certain extent as well. And therefore, don't forget and don't worry, because they're just as interested in making sure you get the opportunity for your son or daughter to apply to these schools. Should it be an appropriate choice for them? So it's all very scary at the moment. Hopefully today, I probably won't, I normally terrify people, but hopefully James and Andrew will give you some comfort to those of you whose children are in the middle of their admissions process, just about to sort of sign up and start the journey around year 5, or teeing up for the final round of the assessments at your chosen schools for your child. So that's what we're here to discuss, and you'll be pleased to hear I will stop discussing it now and hand over to our first speaker, Andrew Mayfield of St Paul's School, London, and Director of Admissions there. Andrew, don't forget to turn off mute, and thank you so much for joining us, and yeah, off you go, and I'll pick it up at the end.
Good morning. Thank you, William. It's lovely to join you all actually from St Paul's here this morning. And in fact, this morning I've already met and interviewed 2 13+ candidates, and I'm looking forward to meeting 2 more boys when we finish. So admissions here at St Paul's, it's ongoing. Our experiences of the past 3 months, the current restrictions on our usual way of life, and our limited knowledge, obviously, of what lies ahead, leaves us all apprehensive about how admissions processes may change going forwards. But I'll outline this morning briefly where St Paul's currently stands on admissions. And before I do, I'll state a few just obvious points. 1, we all, I'm afraid, get a year older every year. And every year, 200 boys leave our school. And to keep us functioning, we have to replace these boys with younger boys, or drastically alter our school model, which we don't want to do. 2, our admissions program dovetails annually into the annual life cycle of the school, and it's difficult to implement any significant change to this. 3, admissions programs deal with huge numbers of candidates. Given the cycle runs between year 5 and year 8, there are times during the year when we have more applications that we're dealing with than there are actually pupils in the school. And 4, any changes to our admissions processes affect not only us, they knock onto you, your children, and importantly, their schools. So admissions programs are large, complex operations, but the bottom line is we want to welcome new children every year to the school. The admissions process basically breaks down into 3 neat phases. It's about you choosing us, then, which is generally in year 5, then us choosing you, which is generally in year 6, and then you choosing us again, which is generally in year 7 and 8. And I suspect all of you this morning fall into one of those categories. So how has COVID-19 altered our operations in each of these? Well, number 1, you choosing us. That's open events. That's you choosing which school to apply to. How has that affected us? Well, straight away off the bat, our large Saturday open event on the 12th of September will now be online. With the present distancing, it's too difficult to run it in school. There's too much risk to the boys, the staff, and you, the visitors. And so we would have too many people in the corridors, too many people in the halls, and too many people in the classrooms. So we are going to do it online instead. So our plan is for live talks from me, from our new High Master, and from maybe a pupil or two. And we'll take live questions at the end from visitors. And we're going to be shooting a video of our new pristine empty school in the next couple of weeks. And we also hope to have some Zoom rooms where visitors can meet during the morning with key members of staff and talk to them. It's not perfect, but we believe in the live element, and we want to give that interaction to you as much as we can during that day. So for those of you who've been out on the open day circuit, you'll realize that we senior schools spend a lot of time choreographing these events. So you see the best venues, so you drink our best coffee, and we try and arrange it so that you speak to the most eloquent pupils and staff. But if you look carefully, you'll always be able to find the untidy and rebellious ones. And I'm not just talking about the teachers, I'm talking about the pupils as well. And they're the ones who'll give you the inside line on what the school's really like, and they might even show you to a grotty classroom or two. But with the online offering you're going to get this autumn, you're going to miss those special moments. There are going to be fewer people presenting to you. It's going to be glitter all the way, sun-soaked images of the school, carefully sculptured blinds, and a finely tuned message. And they may even record it just for ultimate perfection. So you won't be able to scratch beneath the surfaces you often did when you came to visit. But do remember that no school is perfect, no matter how beautiful the image. So before you go online to these open events, it's worth thinking about what matters to you, and then determine from the message that you get what is important to them, and importantly, what gets left on the cutting room floor, and do they tick all your boxes? And also, as you're probably going to do later on, engage and probe with the question and answer sessions. There are, of course, some benefits from online open days. You'll be able to virtually visit lots more schools from the comfort of your own chair, with your own coffee in hand, without that scrum for car parks, that lukewarm tea, and getting to talk to the head of sport. But I suspect many families out there with children going into year 6 have completed your tours earlier this year. For those of you who haven't seen us, whilst we can't see you in September, we want to get you in as soon as we possibly can. And I suspect that's the same for all schools. So if the virus behaves, we're hoping to begin smaller tours later in the autumn term. And our program for next year's year 5 parents will commence in the new year. So if we're successful in persuading you to choose us, then you need to register. And you'll need to register online for St. Paul's. That's the date is at the end of September. And that date, I'm telling you, is not changing. We're not moving it. It's a firm deadline. So next stage of the process, us choosing you. How's that changed? Well, it's going to be pretty much as it was before. And for us, when you register, and many other schools, when you register, we'll register register your son, sorry, for the ICB pre-test. And for anyone not familiar with this test, it's an online test. It's sat online and administered normally by your child's school. And it's very similar to a number of other online standardized tests they may have sat before. INCAS, CAT, all of those are similar tests. For those sitting for St. Paul's, our date for the completion of that test is not changing. The test needs to be completed by the 27th of November. In that test, we're looking for children to demonstrate competence and achieve their potential. Importantly, not exceed it. Worth saying also that a huge score in the test will not necessarily increase the chance of an offer of a place. Some of you out there may be concerned about the effect that COVID-19 has had on your child's preparations for the test. I'm not too worried about this. There's plenty of good practice available online, so you don't need to be in school to access that preparation. We use the test primarily, along with the reference, primarily deciding who we're going to interview in the spring. So if you do well in the test and you don't do well in you do well in the test, but you don't necessarily get a strong reference from the school, we'll interview you. If you get a strong reference from the school, but you don't do well in the test, we'll interview. If you do well in both, then of course we'll interview. But if the reference says, in actual fact, we don't think it's the right school, and perhaps the test also indicates that, then we won't interview. Now, school references could be a potential COVID-19 issue, but they shouldn't be. Why would they be? Well, normally heads in those references will offer predictions of a likely performance of a child at the end of year 8. And to get a good steer on those year 8 predictions, it's often likely that they'll refer to year 5 assessment data, which of course will be a robust set of exams that they've normally sat at the end of the year 5. Probably haven't sat those tests this year. But you have to remember that the heads are experienced and so are the teams around them, and they'll have plenty of other data to write those reports on. So they will still give good indications to us of how your children will perform. And of course, if they come back and do exceptionally well, we're also open to hearing from heads how children are progressing in year 6, and we often hear from them. So we will decide before Christmas who we're going to take forward from the pre-test stage and the reference stage through to interview in the new year. And in 2021, January, we'll start our 13 plus interviews as we have done every year in the past. It'll be nice and steady. We won't be rushing it. So we're not expecting any changes. Didn't quite happen like that this year. We got paused halfway through March in our 13 plus interviews. So whole schools closed down and we had to restart. And we have restarted. We started because the government said year 6 could go back. We've restarted at the summer half term. We've done a detailed risk assessment and we're all now completing our interviews socially distanced. It's been pretty busy because we've had a lot to get through, but we'll complete all the interviews next week. And whilst we can't, unfortunately, meet the parents in school, we have been Zooming all of the parents 24 hours in advance of their son's interview at the school to ask them if they've got any questions about the visit and to give them confidence to send their sons in. We've been using big ventilated classrooms for the interviews. We've been doing a lot of hand washing and we've been doing a lot of table wiping, but it's all going well. So if there is a semi-lockdown next year, we've got a tried and tested process for keeping the interviews going. Now, I'm sure some of you are wondering, and just how are the boys after 2.5 months out of school? And I have to say, yes, we were a little apprehensive about this before we started. But I should say the boys are doing well and better than expected. Their powers of analysis are pretty much where they should be. Their knowledge is perhaps a little bit behind. Their sharpness of thought, perhaps a little bit rusty. And they're certainly not in the old interview groove as they were when they were in March. But they haven't regressed back into year 5 boys. They come with 3 months of additional maturity and some interesting new pastimes. A lot of boys have taken up cooking, we're finding. I think that when current year 5 boys do get back to school, and we hope they do in September, that as the lessons progress, they'll become more unified in their learning. And of course, hopefully schools will take any necessary remedial action to get them back on track. And I think we'll find by Christmas that they will once again be ready for your interviewing in the spring. And for those of you who know more about the St Paul's process, we also have, obviously at the end of year 6, we send out offers. But for those people who don't get offers, there's another opportunity for assessment in year 8, a second round in effect in year 8. And just for information on that, we're planning to run our year 8 assessments as we have done before, no changes. Of course, if there is distancing to be had, then we will use larger halls and we will sit the candidates further apart. But in terms of times of the changing, the assessments will take place later in the autumn term. Now, if you get through the us choosing you phase, of course, that's the most important bit to follow. We're in the most exciting bit, which is you choosing us. And this is the big bit that really counts. And for us, this occurs at the end of year 7 or the autumn term of year 8. This is where you pay your deposit and sign all the forms. It's the most important decision and most important part of the entire process. This is the point that you do have to visit the school. You do have to meet the heads. You do have to meet teachers, and you do need to get your sons to talk to the boys in the school. And this is where COVID-19 has affected us. It has delayed that process. So also that and the arrival of a new High Master, we have slipped our deadline for acceptances back from the end of June in year 7 to the end of September in year 8 so that we can actually meet people. And this now is a priority for us, getting year 7 and potentially year 8, though, when they're coming through later on, boys and parents into the school to meet us so that hopefully we can work out whether they want to accept the offers. But for many of you, I suspect, in actual fact, being in that position of year 7 and 8, you're not actually don't have children in those years. You've got them in the younger years. And I hope when that point, the crucial point comes for you in the system, in actual fact, all of this distancing will now be a thing of the past and you'll be able to get in and meet them as you should. That's really all about COVID-19 and us. 3 quick things. Broadly, at the moment, we're keeping our dates the same. And our aim is to mirror our usual processes so to give some surety to you, your children and their current schools, which is working them through the same process as we want them to be. I'll underline that central to our assessment process is the candidates demonstrating a good all-round education and a love of learning. So we are hoping that they can return to full schooling as soon as possible. Finally, of course, if we go into lockdown again, then we'll need to reconsider carefully how we adapt our process. but we don't want to drift too far from our present timeline and model. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Andrew. I did the classic there and just was talking with the mute on, which is exactly the thing I'm not meant to do. Really interesting, really brilliant sort of whistle-stop tour about the St Paul's process. So thank you, and also just really quite reassuring, particularly as given what I do for a living, but also as a parent, just to hear, how little, in fact, has been, if anything, has been truly sacrificed, and how close to normal conditions you've managed to get the process to carry on operating. So that's fabulous, and I'm sure some comfort to those applying to schools like yours, or indeed St Paul's. The other thing I would say is that the big worry, I suppose, and Andrew, you spoke about this, is what state are the applicants in, and has there been some sort of biblical kind of intellectual rot? They've all regressed Shakespearean style back to the beginning as toddlers and lost everything. And of course, we know that that's pretty unlikely in children, particularly around that age, 9, 10 and onwards. The retention does sort of skyrocket from when they were younger. I mean, my 5-year-old's a disaster area. You can't retain what happened 30 seconds ago, let alone the last academic year. But I've been reassured by specialists and teachers that will grow out of that. But as they're a bit older, they are a bit more resilient. However, I would like to say to parents, do keep them engaged at home if they're coming up to these assessments and they're not in school in any formal way. Don't just think that the homeschooling is going to cut it, because that's really delivering a slightly different job. That's keeping the curriculum content up and going, and actually, they're not getting the same level of interaction with teachers, with their peers, that they would be were they at school in a normal classroom environment. So I do think it's wise for parents to take on a bit more of that burden in the run-up to any of these interviews, keeping current affairs being discussed at the kitchen table, all the basics, and making sure they're a bit chipper. And the classic ones, getting exercise, getting to sleep, and sort of eating properly in and around the big moments of that admissions process, where you want to be on form and not too nervous and palm sweaty. So Andrew, thank you, and I'm sure there'll be a heap of questions towards the end. And so now on to Master of Wellington College, James Dahl, who is going to take us 35 miles out of London and discuss what's happening at a co-educational boarding and day school equivalent to the stature of St Paul's, and see how they're dealing with it. James, thank you so much for joining us, and over to you.
William, it's a real pleasure, and thank you for being here. And yes, here we are on our hermetically sealed bubble of a 400-acre site in beautiful Berkshire countryside. You couldn't be safer. Andrew has covered so much of great ground in his address, and I would just like to say to everyone really to reassure you and comfort you that although COVID-19 has changed our lives in so many different ways, like Andrew said, it's actually not, we think, going to have a huge impact on the admissions process at Wellington. And I think one of the messages I'd like to get across to all of the parents who are in this is that you're all in the same boat. It's not as if some schools have been open and have been delivering a Premier League educational provision in the flesh for the last 3 months, and others haven't. There is an element of a level playing field to all of this. Andrew talked about the ISCB pretest. Wellington and so many schools use it too, and have done for many, many years. And I think another thing to say about that pretest is that half of it, the verbal and the non-verbal reasoning section, aren't based on any taught curriculum content. I don't think the boys and girls will be hugely disadvantaged when they come to take the test. For us, it's in October and November, so a very similar timeline to Andrew as well. They may be a little bit behind on the content of maths and English, but then I suspect all of the candidates will be. And if schools really are all open with full attendance in September, as Boris told us earlier this week, then I do hope that will give all of those schools who are experts in preparing Year 6 children for these pre-tests, it will give them September and October, you know, a good 7 or 8 weeks, the first half of that Michaelmas term, really to bring the boys and girls back up to speed. So I noticed that one of the questions in the chat was, will we be widening our net in terms of results to get through to our second stage, our interview process as well? And I really don't think that we'll have to, actually. But another thing I'd like to reassure all of the parents here about is something that Andy talked about, which is that we have the test results, but we also have the prep school report, the reference that comes through. At Wellington, we have 2 different members of staff who read every single one of those references separately and grade them. And we also liaise with all of our key prep school feeder heads before we make any cut-off decisions at stage 1. So if a child has underperformed on the test, but the reference and the input that we're getting from the conversations we have with the prep heads is saying, look, James, look, Ed, you know, little Johnny or Lucy, they're absolutely perfect for Wellington. We would always listen to the advice of the prep school rather than focusing on scores on a test that were a one-off on one day of a child's continued journey, educational journey. We also, like Andy at Wellington, we have a big process in Year 6. So about 75% of our places are offered during the Year 6 process, but we hold back around a quarter of our places for late applicants in Year 7 and even in Year 8. So we hope that reassures people as well, and that's not only for people who didn't register in time first time round, it's also for some of those late developers. So we might have girls and particularly boys who go through the process in Year 6 and we're just not quite sure that they're ready for a school like Wellington back then, but then they come back in Year 7 and Year 8 and it's clear that they are. So there really is a number of different routes going forward. So I hope that is reassuring too. In terms of visiting us and also our interactive stage 2 of the admissions process in January and February, we're just trying to be as flexible and as creative as we possibly can be. And those 2 words have been so central to everything we've done at Wellington over the last 3 months. So we've already broadcast live open mornings, visitors' days from Wellington. We did one back in the first half of term, and we recorded it. We had pupils beaming in via Microsoft Teams, so we were able to interact and ask questions of them, and we've sent the link to that video recording to hundreds of parents over the last 6 weeks. So I don't think anyone has missed out in terms of hearing from us and hearing from the pupils. They have, of course, as Andy said, missed out on visiting the school and looking round. And all of the market research suggests that the one key thing, well, there are 2 key things that parents take into consideration when judging senior schools is, one, what they felt like inside their heart as well as inside their mind when they visited the school in person and met some of the pupils and spoke to some of the teachers. And the second, of course, is friends who've got children already at St Paul's or Wellington or any other school. And I would encourage everyone on this call here today that if you have got friends who've got children at Wellington or any other school, you ask them about what the 3 months has been like. What has the education provision been? You know, how's the school communicated? You know, we'll all be judged, I think, in all of our organisations on how we have delivered and adapted during this very difficult time. So do have those conversations. But when visits to schools can come online again, which I think will be the case in next term and beyond, again, I don't think it'll be the big 400 people at a time in the theatre visits, but as a boarding school, we can get parents in a lot on a Saturday morning, and so we'll be looking creatively and flexibly as allowing as many prospective parents to come and visit us as we can. But you must do that. You must come and visit schools, and I know that all schools will be desperate to facilitate that too. I think probably the final thing I should say is about our stage 2, our stage 1 of our admissions process, which happens in November of of year 6 is references and tests. And then in January and February, we have our assessment days here at Wellington. And we've already got a plan A, a plan B and a plan C for those assessment days, bearing in mind government guidelines and how many children we can come in on those days. So plan A is obviously to carry on as usual, have 50 or 60 children in on each day and have interviews and a whole series of interactive group lessons and activities. Plan B is to limit the number and host more assessment days. So maybe only have 20 or 30 children in, maybe some in the morning, some in the afternoon, have them more socially distanced and get through it that way. And plan C, which we have done over the last 3 months, is to conduct some assessments via video conferencing. And that's definitely a plan C, but we've got a number of different routes that we can pursue. So be reassured, I hope, be comforted that although the processes and timelines will roughly stay the same, all schools are going to be creative and flexible and try and support you as prospective parents as best they can during the next 18 to 24 months or however long it is until we found a vaccine.
James, thank you so much. Another great sort of round of insight, particularly to Wellington College, but also just reaffirming, I hope, for parents that you know, all is still very much in motion. There's very little give to the normal quality and thoroughness of these processes. I just wanted to sort of talk a little bit about what James mentioned about, you know, that feeling in your heart, not only you know, in your eye and in your mind of when you go to a school, and that is, you know, lots of things don't come through the computer screen, including, thank God, so far still scratch and sniff, which they've not invented. But it's, you know, it is such a pity, and as a business who spends a big chunk of their lives and our lives physically taking children to see schools, often parents from, you know, who are seeing public schools and boarding schools of St Paul's and Wellington stature for the very first time. It's their eldest child. It's the first time they've done the senior school transition. And, you know, they're extraordinary institutions and missing out on all that wonder and insight. And, you know, there's only so much you can learn from your child's prep school or primary school's steps at the school gates at the end of the day from other parents. You know, they can't give you the feeling that a school gives you with the power that schools like Wellington and St Paul's do, of course, when you do get to physically turn up. Do the virtual tours, I would say to parents as well. You know, you've got you know, it's good to be seen, I would always say, is, you know, being interested in the school. You should be, and if you're not, then you should question why you'll keep turning up. You know, so do put your eggs in the right basket. Once you've done that, go on the virtual tours. You know, as Andrew was saying, pre-plan, think about things that are important to you. You're not going to get everything you want out of the virtual tour, but at the same time, I think you could probably capitalize a little bit on the attention you're going to get, because quite a few people will be a bit nervous and won't really know how to approach it. So, you know, you can plan for that and probably get a few more sort of personal questions that are interesting to you and your child answered than maybe you would in a sort of seething mass of people being ushered through the cloisters and the courtyards. I'm just trying to drag up a silver lining about virtual tours. I mean, it's quite tricky. They're not many. You cannot argue that seeing the thing in real life is where it's at. It does now look like everybody, whatever their entry year, is going to get that opportunity if they are already residing in Britain. I'm afraid there will be people, of course, who get caught up in the issues of domestic quarantine, receiving quarantine, although it doesn't seem to be anything that worrying here. It's just everywhere else. So, James, Andrew, we've got some questions. I'm to those who've asked questions and sent them through before and today, thank you so much. Please keep doing so on the Q&A tab in Zoom. We won't, I'm afraid, get to all of them, so I'll pick sort of ones that are being asked quite a few times. If you've got very specific questions, please look out for our email following the talk. Please get in touch with Bonas MacFarlane, and we can help you from there. You know, no matter what your discussions are within the independent education sector. A lot of these questions have been asked as we've whizzed through. So I'm going to pick something totally unrelated, actually, from today about admissions, but not COVID admissions, just to cheer everybody up and stop talking about the dreaded thing. So I'll just ask James first, and then maybe flip back to Andrew. And I will say to our viewers that neither one of our guests today may know these exact answers. Some of these are quite specific, but I think if we could just say to expect to steer from them. But someone has asked, what percentage, James, first, of mainstream children are given a bursary or a scholarship? So I'm assuming, let's say what percentage of your intake are on a bursary or a scholarship?
At Wellington, the figure's about 10%, just over 10%. We've got 1,054 pupils in the school at the moment, and just over 100 of those are in receipt of a means-tested bursary. All financial aid at Wellington, and actually at many schools now, is done purely through means-tested. So actually back in 2014, 6 years ago, the governors at Wellington decided to stop giving 10%, 20% off the fees to try and for want of a better verb, bribe parents to send their talented children to Wellington. We felt morally it was right to focus all of our fee remission and financial aid to families who actually needed that. So at Wellington, it's about 10%, and we want to grow it as well. We've just launched or relaunched a programme this year to raise £25 million by 2025 to increase the number of children on charitable 110% bursaries up to 40 at any one time in the school. So, and on the scholarship side of things, we've actually gone down the route of offering our 13 plus scholarships, mainly at the end of a child's first year at Wellington. So the exception to that is music. So talented musicians can come and have an audition in year 8 and get a music scholarship, which gives them free tuition in 2 instruments, and academics as well. So those prep schools that have a very strong scholarship stream and want to stretch their most able beyond the common entrance syllabus, for example, or the prep school baccalaureate, we still offer that. But actually we've decided to offer scholarships at the end of having the children with us for a year. So we've seen them across 3 terms in art and in sport and in drama and dance and design engineering, rather than judging a scholarship award on performance on one day for a 2-hour programme. So that's the Wellington position.
Great one, thank you. And well, that sounds very exciting. I've always been rather fond of that idea where you're bringing them in and then judging the scholarship over their first year. I think that's most sensible. And of course you touched on a measure that actually people like me and Andrew will be aware of, but a lot of new parents coming into this market aren't, which is that scholarships really have never had a great history of financial aid attached to them in this country. There has been some sort of discount at most schools for now, but it's for a long time been sub 15% or far more likely 10%, and therefore not exactly sort of the kind of discount on a full fee that would make you decide between independent school and not, I would argue. And we have seen a lot of schools like Wellington, not using the money for that side of things because it's not really where it's needed, and focusing much more on the kind of the means tested financial assistance and the scholars sort of reverting to what was kind of already the case in the eyes of the teaching independent teaching world anyway, which is the scholarships for academics and talent are their own reward really, in terms of the stature and the extra exposure to master classes or artists in residence and all those amazing add-ons that such fabulous schools like the 2 represented here offer. Andrew, a quick word from you on the same question, if I may.
Yes, very similar to James's in actual fact. In our line approach is identical to his really. We offer bursaries here to St Paul's, again, all means tested. The information's available on our website if you want to go and look at what we actually do. But in terms of numbers in the school, I think James is just a fraction ahead of where we are. We, in the St Paul's juniors and St Paul's seniors, we've got about 1,500 boys in total, and we've got just over 100, well, moving on from 100 actually, boys on means tested bursaries. Our target is to get to 153, which is the magic number of fishes in the Bible. Dean Collett's favourite number, 153, and that's our target to get there. And we've launched a number of campaigns over the years. Martin Stephen, who's sitting up there on the wall, was the first one to launch it 20 years ago, and 15 years ago. And since then, we've relaunched it a number of times, and we've had a major relaunch in the last 12 months, looking to raise, as James is, large sums of money from which we can draw down on to supplement, to help actually fund children coming through the school. So we're actively looking for children to come and join the school. Lots join at 11, coming into St Paul's Juniors for 2 years and then transferring into St Paul's Seniors, and also a number join at 16 plus as well. So the two major points where the state sector allows children to switch schools. So yes, a number joined at 16 plus this year, and it's been really good to help some of these children just sort of take those last 2 years of education and move them forwards. We're on the same position as James in terms of scholarships, really. Scholarships carry no financial weight here at St Paul's any longer. It's honorary. So we can still get your 13 plus scholarship, I'm afraid, through exam, different to Wellington there. But 16 plus senior scholars are actually, they have to do the first year of A-level. So they have to convince us that they are good A-level students before they'll get a senior scholarship at St Paul's. So more along the Wellington model there. And yes, we do music scholarships as well. But bursaries, yes, we're working on it. We're well over 100, and we're looking to get to 153. And we'll carry on pushing on from there. But again, it's money. It's a combination of raising enough money, and it's also a combination of finding the children that are going to thrive at St Paul's and want to come. We've got the money and we've got the children. We're definitely keen to have them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andrew and James, for that. Now, I'm really going to ask this next question to both of you just for my own amusement, because I know the answer, and I also know that how lesser men than the two of you might be really bored of hearing the question. But I think in answering it, you know, actually joking aside, it will give our viewers quite an important insight into these sort of cognitive tests, these pre-tests that happen at the beginning of both of your processes. And I think you'll see why. And the question is, and Andrew, we'll start with you before you sort of, you know, you catch your breath. What is the pass mark for your test? And by your test, I'm going to say how you each look at the pre-test, the ICB pre-test. Let's keep it to that.
There is no pass mark. And as I said when I was talking, if you get you can get a very poor score in the ICB pre-test. But if your prep school head says this kid is amazing for St Paul's, but on the day of the test, in actual fact, the goldfish died and he was late for school, and in actual fact, he didn't feel well because breakfast didn't go down particularly well, and he performed atrociously badly. But we think he is absolutely perfect for your school. We'll interview him. And then you can get the other kid who gets 141 right across the board, and in actual fact, and prep school says this guy's rubbish for you, and we're saying, well, maybe the prep school hasn't actually got the best out of him, in which case we'll interview him. So there is no magic mark. And when it comes to actual fact offering places at the school, we look at four things. We look at the pre-test numbers. Yes, that was a test on a day where a child sat down in front of the computer and answered a random pile of questions. There's two shorter written assessments they do at St Paul's, where we check that they can actually, in fact, rather than do multiple choice English, they can actually write in sentences, and they've got ideas to write in sentences as well. And then, so we do an English assessment, a maths assessment when they come here to St Paul's. We have a prep school head report, we have the ISA pre-test, but importantly and fundamentally, we'll sit down with the child, and James is going to say the same thing. We'll sit down with the child and we'll talk to them. And it was interesting what you said, William, because I want to come back to you actually when you were talking about your 5-year-old and reading the newspaper to them. In actual fact, you know, as I was talking about our assessments that we're doing now, okay, children's knowledge base isn't as great in the boys that we're seeing over the last few weeks as it has been when we were interviewing them in March. But they're still intelligent human beings. And so we're using a lot more resource material. And just as you were saying, talk to your children about what's going on in the news, we're doing resource material and saying, well, what are your ideas about this? What do you think about this? And William, just as you said, your son can't remember anything from the day before. It doesn't matter if he can't remember the facts, because in actual fact, we're putting the facts in front of him. What we want to see is, what's his powers of analysis? What does he think? Is he interested? Has he got a question? Can he take it forward? Then that's far more valuable to us, because that's how they're going to behave and how they're going to perform when they're in front of a teacher in a classroom. And that's what we need to find out, what they're going to be like when they get to the school, not whether, because we won't be teaching them verbal reasoning and non-verbal reasoning when they arrive. That's not what we're about. We're about finding exciting people who want to be excited in the classroom and will really thrive in our types of education. So there you go. There is no pass mark. It's one of four things we look at, and it's probably not the strongest. Possibly the interview is the strongest. James.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, parents might not believe this, but in my very first year at Wellington, when I was director of admissions, we rejected the boy who came top on the ICB pre-test. So he was first out of 850 kids who'd done the test, 141 across the piece, and we rejected him. Why? Because he wasn't the right sort of pupil to come and flourish at a big and busy boarding school like Wellington, and we find that out on the day when he came to interact with us and be interviewed. It wasn't he wasn't a phenomenally bright boy and will have been a great success elsewhere, but there is so much more to admissions processes. It is a jigsaw, and those jigsaw pieces that Andy uses at St Paul's are exactly the same jigsaw pieces that we use here. We're a big school. We've got, like St Paul's, we're over 1,000 pupils, and we're a big boarding school as well. And we thrive on holistic education, on everything that goes on, and boys and girls who just want to work very hard and take no advantage of anything else that's on offer at Wellington, either inside the boarding house or in the remarkable co-curricular offering we've got here, then they're probably not for us. So that's why we take so much time and care at our assessment day to interact with the children, get to know their personalities and their characters, their values, their passion for life. I think there's a rumour out there that, you know, to get into schools like St Paul's and Wellington and others, that not only have you got to be a future Oxbridge neuroscientist, but you've already got to be a county rugby player or a grade 8 cellist. And it's just not true. What we're looking for is children who love life, who love school, who've got passions, and whatever that might be. And we interviewed a boy earlier this year who all he could talk about in an interview is his passion for beekeeping. But he spoke in such an unbelievably intelligent, mature, passionate way about this that we thought, actually, you're going to come to a school like Wellington and you're going to discover all of these different amazing things, and you're just going to get the most out of this school. I'm glad you asked the question, William, because there really is no magic pass mark. Honest.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you both for your patience in dealing with that time-old classic question. The great thing, I suppose, rather than doing this in my usual setting, you know, in a hall or theatre on a stage, is that on Zoom we can't hear that sort of collective muttering from all the keen parents listening, going, nonsense, of course there's a pass mark, of course there's a pass mark. Doesn't matter how many times I tell people this, but they genuinely, 80% of parents still don't believe it. But it really is true, everybody. There's so much more to what the best schools are looking for than raw grades. And they're an incredibly crude measure in many ways, that they're better than they've ever been. But, you know, no sensible school would dream of relying solely on that test. Because it just tells you, hopefully, something about a small area of a particular child. But it can be inaccurate, and you get false positives, false negatives, and you know, it's important to look at the whole thing in context of the whole application. And you will find, by the way, parents listening, that the boarding sector has a tendency to earn more towards the sort of full holistic. Just because in London the number of schools is much lower, and there is more of a tradition of sort of academic statistics being talked about a lot. But still, both St Paul's and both Wellington, you know, that it's not just a specific type of brilliance in a specific test. It's not, you know, necessarily brilliance at all. But it's got to be all those classic things of being interesting and being able to fit at that school. And one thing that we talk about a lot, and I think a lot of parents do struggle to sort of really believe, is that, you know, school and student is a two-way relationship, and these great schools have become great by great, you know, students turning up and contributing to them and adding to that tapestry and leaving, in some cases, a mark, in some cases, you know, a legacy, and that's why they've become so extraordinary over their sort of centuries. And you know, the school wants the child to fit just as much as you want your child to fit properly, because then there is the ingredients for your child to thrive over their 5 or 7 years, depending when you start senior school. So, you know, the system works. It works really quite well, whatever you might think. Obviously, there are anomalies either side, people that maybe should have got through the net and didn't quite make it, people that did quite make it maybe shouldn't have done. They're extremely rare, actually. When you look at the numbers involved, they're really, really rare. So, by and large, these systems, you know, for parents out there, they do work really well. It's the most likely thing is that your child will be get the results that they deserve it in, you know, in the nicest possible way. So please, you know, don't obsess, don't over tutor, don't turbo train. Read the paraphernalia from the schools. Talk to them about the admissions process, and crucially, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but it is probably the one thing that parents out there might not do, is believe them when they tell you what you're reading. They're not making it up. You're not being hoodwinked at any point. Right. We'll have, I think we've probably just got time to squeeze in one or two more questions. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I suppose this is quite a tricky one in some ways, perhaps not. So, James, we'll just come back to you straight away. So someone has asked, your schools, I think she means both of your schools are quite competitive and selective. I was wondering if you admit children with certain disabilities. I'll add there that I put learning differences and maybe also disabilities, but I think we'll stick to cognitive differences and mild behavioural ones for the need of this question. But she then mentions high functioning autism, ADHD, etc. If so, how do these boys, and in your case boys and girls, James, do in your schools, and what provisions are there to support them? So probably more of a bigger question about provisions for learning differences and to what extent your schools can cope with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the short answer is yes, all schools have children who are dyspraxic, dyslexic, who are on an ADHD medication. I mean, I think that, having worked in schools for 22 years, I think probably the growth in diagnoses on ADHD over the last 5 years has rocketed, and so all schools are dealing with that. Some ASD pupils at Wellington, but I think whatever the particular learning need that any child has, as they come through the process, the admissions process with us, we need to ask the question, are they going to be able to come here and be happy and thrive, looking at the challenges that they face within their lives? And in order to make that judgment, we use our learning support, our academic support department at Wellington. So we ask parents to be really open with us, to send in EdPsych reports, to engage with our head of academic support. And sometimes our head of academic support will go out to prep schools and will spend half a day shadowing a child, talking to their current Senko or support teachers, so that we can make a really balanced and nuanced judgment as to whether we think that they can come and thrive here. Wellington is a big place. It is very busy, and it's primarily boarding. Over 80% of our children here live in close-knit boarding communities. So it's not just about, are they going to be able to thrive and be supported inside the classroom, but are they going to be able to thrive and be supported in every aspect of their school life? We have, again, it's a bit like the bursary number. We have over 100 pupils at Wellington who are on an individual education plan. So that's a plan that has been created for them by the academic support department and shared with all teachers, because there is some additional need that child or children have. So it is absolutely not a no. When we see that a child is dyslexic or on the ASD spectrum, when we read a reference, genuinely, we don't run a mile. We don't think, oh gosh, we couldn't possibly make that work. We just have to take extra care to make sure that somewhere like Wellington, and I'm sure it'd be the same at St Paul's, will be that environment where their needs can be met and where they can flourish and be truly happy.
Brilliant, James. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, just on that note as well, I mean, you have to remember, parents out there, that a school is not being negligent if they decide they can't take on your child with the learning needs that they may be presenting. They're being diligent. They're making sure that should your child come, they not only can they thrive, but also that whatever additional support that is required for your child to be performing at their best is available. And some schools, make that more of a feature, and therefore have a large department of people and experts and peripatetic consultants and therapists who can help with that. And others make a decision, to be slightly more towards the mainstream, but still have significant numbers of children in those groups, but they will probably be more along the end of what we call the high functioning side of things. So their academic stuff is a no-brainer, and it's more about strategies and that kind of thing. Because the first thing really, whether you've got some sort of acronym or word beginning with DYS associated with you, if that's not really the first thing. The first thing is, are you of the sort of academic level that this school expects, and therefore the one in which means you will be comfortable as a student there, not struggling around at the bottom. And then if you have any particular needs, looking at that. But that's the judgment, I would say, is not on your learning needs so much. It's on, you know, whether the school is correct for you in the first place, and then everything after that is you know, housekeeping. Andrew, I don't know if you wanted to add anything on that, and I imagine a lot of your answers would be very similar or the same.
Very similar. I've got 3 sons. They've all been to St Paul's. One's dyspraxic, one's dyslexic. So children get through St Paul's and they are cared for and supported for as they go through. The answers are very similar to James's, really. Yes, one has to look at each child individually, and see whether they would be a good fit for St Paul's and whether they would thrive within the classroom. There are lots of very intelligent children out there that for one reason or another find learning difficulty, and there are many of them here at St Paul's. I mean, the one thing I would just add is that during the admissions process, a number of children sort of say, we need extra time for this, for that, and the other. And yes, in the admissions process, we take account of that, and we give them increased PONT, or we give them extra time or laptops to do their work. So we take account of it through admissions, and as James does, we ask for all the reports in for boys who've got special learning needs, and we take them along to our Senko, and she goes through them very carefully to see whether in actual fact they've got whether they're going to be children that are going to thrive within the school. So yes, very similar in all aspects to James.
Great. Thank you very much. That's brought us up exactly to 11:45, an hour in, and to be honest, I'm well aware that despite partial closures, that both James and Andrew have got an awful lot to be getting on with, and for all the reasons we've just discussed, nothing is changing. Children need to arrive. So James, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. It's been absolutely fabulous having you here, and hopefully it's given all of our viewers and listeners some comfort and reassurance in what has been an uncertain month for people, you know, few months of people all around the world, no matter what they're up to, but particularly those over here waiting to get into one of the great British schools, perhaps. And thank you everyone for listening and joining us. We'll be back with What Price in Education, Grandparents, Tax and Equity release on Tuesday the 30th of June at 10:30. Andrew's shaking his head there in the office. That's called Getting Grandparents to Pay. But we'll be joined by Brew and Dolphin and Knight Frank Finance, and they'll be looking at very interesting ways in which you can be more prepared for affording this education for your children. Many thanks, James and Andrew, once again. Lovely seeing you both virtually, and best of luck with everything we've discussed, and opening again soon, I hope. Cheers. Bye now.